Welcome to another episode of Trouble to Transformation. Today's guest, I have Jeff Sorensen. Jeff is the founder of breathARMY and the lightFORCE Collective, leadership, breathwork, and cold exposure facilitator training academy. His mission is to educate, inspire, and empower people to live to their true potential. Jeff uses a variety of different tools, including breathwork, movement, meditation, cold, heat, and psychedelics to help people break through the structures that hold us back from living and expressing our true potential in the world. Jeff has walked through some of the darkest shadows of trauma, addiction, and mental illness to emerge with a profound wisdom and light which he humbly carries to activate the light and potential in others. He has a unique ability to weave a deep understanding of scientific principles with timeless philosophical and spiritual wisdom in an easy to understand, light, yet incredibly powerful and enjoyable way. Jeff has had the opportunity and privilege to learn and train with some of the world's leading experts and lineages of breath, cold, somatics, movement, thought, and plant medicine. He has uniquely woven these teachings into one of a kind, heartfelt, and impactful offering that has deeply touched thousands of people through the workshops, retreats, courses, and trainings he has offered. Welcome, Jeff. Thank you for being here today. You have a very profound story, one that is very innate to this platform. So thank you for being here with me today.
It's such a pleasure. I'm grateful to be here.
Yes, thank you. And before we jump headfirst into your story, just let the viewers know a little bit about yourself and where are you now?
I am in Revelstoke, BC, and I'm living on a beautiful piece of land. And yeah, it's been a very full circle journey to come back to where I was raised.
You're pretty comfortable with discussing some of the incarceration parts?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah, good. You never get tired of telling your story?
No, it's a pretty good story.
It is. Yeah, it really is. And I've been putting some seeds into some of my clients' ears about your story and letting them know that this interview is happening today. And yeah, it really landed with a lot of guys because I think this lived experience is super important.
Absolutely. I'm excited to share and excited just for guys to receive it and know that there's so much goodness in life and it can be so hard. I'd love to dive into those bits. I'm wondering if we can just jump right into a story that's going to give people a little bit of an idea of the journey that I've been on, and then we can get into some of these details later if you're willing.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have full autonomy to take this interview wherever you like.
Amazing. Well, I would love to take people back to October 23rd, 2003. And I was looking at my own body lying in the back of an ambulance. And the nurse in the back, my body, and the ambulance are covered in blood. And I'm drifting further and further out of my body. And I hear a voice that says to me that you can go back or you can keep drifting off. And if you go back, there will be a lot of suffering. And yet there was a knowing that I needed to go back and that there was still something that I needed to do with my life. And as soon as I made that decision, boom, instantly, I'm back in my body. I rip off the straps on the spine board and I yell at the paramedics in the front, "Take me back to the hospital." Because I knew that I wasn't going to survive the transport to the ICU that was over 2 hours away. And so flash forward, I'm back living my life, and the pain and the injuries from the accident piled on top of a mountain of childhood trauma. They're so bad that I'm now on oxys, benzos, SSRIs, and I'm also partying and self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. And so every morning I'm waking up and I'm grabbing a handful of pills, washing them down with a bottle of leftover booze, chalking up rails that are leftovers of cocaine that are left on the table from the night before. And my life's a disaster. My relationships are a disaster. I feel lost. I feel suicidal. And I'm living this bad boy lifestyle. And eventually I wind up in Mazatlan in Mexico. And I meet a man that works for the Sinaloa cartel. And eventually I got to a point of desperation and gave in to their invitations to start drug trafficking for them. And eventually I quit working for the cartel, but I was convinced to go back and do one last run. And it was a setup. And I got busted by the Mexican military, and I got thrown in jail for what threatened to be a 10 to 25-year sentence. And so the only thing I really cared about at that point in my life were my dogs. And they were staying with a friend of mine while I'm locked in a concrete cell with 1 hour a week outside in the yard where we can talk to people on the outside. And I'll never forget the day that I called my friend Bibi, who was taking care of my dog Carmen, who had been with me every step of the way through my accident, all of the addiction. And when she answered the phone, she says to me, "Jeffrey, I'm so sorry. Carmen was killed by another dog's owner after they got in a fight. I'm so sorry." And the guilt that I felt from leaving her behind. And there's this image of her just burned in my mind. These big brown eyes standing there wagging her tail. And the thought of having lost the most important thing to me in my life, it just was devastating. And so we get called back up into line. We get filed back up to the cell and squashed back into the cell. It's an 11-foot by 11-foot cell, and there's 30 men in there. And so I'm sitting in the corner sweating. You know, it's like 47 degrees. And I'm meditating. And I sit there for days. And eventually, I realize I don't have to suffer anymore. I'm free. And 2 years after landing in that prison cell, I was released by what we could call good luck, or what they say in Spanish is el favor de Dios. And after I got back to Canada, I started to travel the world, and I studied with some of the best known names in breathwork, cold, meditation, yoga, plant medicine, trauma, and I was able to start to rebuild my life. And that pain and suffering that was causing me to numb out, self-sabotage, was no longer running my life. And I was able to really start to experience that same freedom, or that true freedom from within. And now that's what I teach other people to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So were you already kind of experienced in some breathwork and meditation before you went into the cell?
I was actually. I was teaching yoga prior to going to jail and kind of living this double life of owning a restaurant and being a yoga teacher. And I had really been struggling in the restaurant to make ends meet. Because in my addiction, as anybody out there that's listening knows, I spent most of my money in my addiction and managed to get myself clean, but didn't really have the resources at that point to rebuild my life. And I didn't have the mindset to be able to do it either. And so I just got to a point where I didn't have enough money to pay the rent at my house and at the restaurant through the low season. And that's when I said okay to the cartel and started trafficking for them. And at the same time, I'm teaching yoga and I made some money and the restaurant started to do better. And then I quit. And then I was convinced to go back and do that one last run.
One last run.
Yeah.
So, and do you mind if I ask you a few questions around the incarceration part?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Okay, because I heard you say an 11 by 11 cell.
Mm-hmm.
What were the sleeping and hygiene?
Deplorable. There's men sleeping on the floor, head to foot, and there's actually 2 layers in that jail cell. So that cell was made for 6 people, and so there's 2 sets of metal bunks on either side. And off of that top metal bunk, they've welded some kind of like makeshift, what they called la tabla. So it's like a little crawl space that's like 2.5, 3 feet tall. And so the other half of the people sleep on the tabla, and that's like a level up, because sleeping on the floor where I started to sleep and where everybody starts to sleep when they come into the cell is right next to the toilet. And so the floor, the toilet and the shower are both one, so there's pipe coming out of the wall that you shower with. And so that floor is always wet, and that's where you land when you get into the cell. And interestingly, when I first got into that cell, after I got through the initial wave of fear and anger and disbelief and confusion, one of the first thoughts I had was, where am I going to practice yoga in here? And I realized the only place that I was going to be able to do that was if I kept that space right beside the toilet, because nobody else wanted it.
Interesting. So what I'm hearing then is the yoga and meditation was like your guidepost in there.
Yeah, that was my lifeline, and that's what got me out. And I work with 3 main pillars, which are radical ownership, self-mastery, and becoming legendary. And self-mastery for me in that circumstance was all about, where am I going to cultivate my own inner state? Because I knew that I needed to be at peace with where I was at in order to get where I wanted to go.
So when I hear that mastery of that inner peace, was there any support in there for you to say that? Yeah, I guess with that reaction, probably not. Did you make any connections in there?
Well, I was one gringo in a prison of 3,000 Mexicans. And so I did make some friends and people that I still keep in touch with. And yet there's a deep unconscious wound there between Mexicans and gringos. And so I got to be the projection piece for all of that unconscious wounding. And it didn't matter how good of friends we got to be. At the end of the day, a Mexican would stand with a Mexican, regardless of what had happened or how it had happened. And I don't blame them, like anybody that's listening that's been in a situation like that knows that that world is very different than the world that we live in outside. And it's a world of survival and animal instinct. And so you need to do what you need to do in order to survive. So I don't blame them for doing it,
Yeah.
but it was a pretty lonely place when shit went down.
I can only imagine. Was there any support from the people that you had worked for?
No, it was a setup. They knew that I was going to jail. And so thankfully, I did have my family here in Canada who was obviously, destroyed by the thought that their son is sitting in a Mexican prison cell.
That's
And,
terrifying.
and I don't think that they wanted to come and see what circumstances I was living them in. And I certainly also didn't want them to come and see me there.
Yeah. Have you been able to repair some of those relationships with family over the years?
Oof, incredibly, yes. Yeah, it's been a long journey of reparation, and my mom passed away about 10 years ago, and we were able to get to a good place before she passed. And my dad is still alive, and we have an incredible relationship.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, that means a lot.
Oof.
Repair those relationships, right? Because I can't even imagine the weight of the guilt and shame and regret that you were carrying, being in that situation.
It's crushing, and there's only one thing that we can do is pick ourselves up and keep going. And it doesn't matter how, I'm going to put this in air quotes for anybody who's listening, but bad that things get. They can always get worse and they can always get better. And if we choose for them to get better, and if we choose to do the things that will support that unfolding of life unfolding in a better way, then we can work ourselves out of some really deep, dark holes. But
That's
it
excellent.
takes a lot of commitment.
Absolutely. And one thing too, Jeff, that I just kind of wanted to touch on, I did hear you say, like that darkness, that primitive animalistic, like when you're in Mexico, like did that change your perspective on marginalized, desperation and the psychology of where people are at living in Mexico that get caught up into these organized crime groups?
Absolutely. The whole thing was an incredible blessing, to be able to have had that experience and to be where I am now is an incredible blessing. And that was one of the most beautiful gifts, was to really deeply understand the human experience. And these men that had grown up in extreme poverty, and they grow up watching MTV, and there's cartels that are working throughout Mexico, and these guys have got money. They look like rock stars, and these guys don't want to live in poverty with, they don't feel like they've got any options. And, they've got so few role models of people that have managed to find their way through it. And when you see the cartel driving through town in a brand new Denali pickup, when you're living in a little hut with a dirt floor, then what decision are you going to make? It's so yeah, it gave me a lot of insight into people and why all of us make the decisions that we make. We're operating from the level of consciousness that we have, and so we make decisions based on that, and those decisions have consequences that sometimes we don't fully think through.
Yes, absolutely. Because I mean, even in my experiences, I have also met people from different parts of the world. And when I hear their stories, I can't even wrap my head around it.
Hmm.
It's something that we've never even seen, and this is what they are raised in, born and raised in. So they also have a different perspective on human life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. After I got out of jail in Mexico and finally worked my way out of there, I I was so focused on just getting out of that prison. And I knew that there was going to be some other issues when I got out. And I just didn't have the headspace to be able to focus on that next step at the same time. So I got taken to a detention facility in Tijuana, which was an immigration detention facility. And so while I was there for about a month. And so those aren't Mexicans in that prison. They're people from Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. And that was a whole nother level of seeing the poverty and the mentality of people that see life in a very different way and are willing to take life in order to survive. And I think up here in Canada and the States, we can watch all the cartel movies and things that we want, but we don't really understand that mindset of somebody who has grown up in that and just how deep that goes and how many people are living like that in those conditions and just making decisions based on survival.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm just going to quickly share an individual. I'll just call him Chico for the sake of this conversation.
Yeah.
He was orphaned by the age of 11. And the guerrilla warfare had captured him, tortured
Mhm.
him. He had escaped from that. And then eventually he ended up into the hands of the cartel, which he eventually landed in Canada. And he had to make a 3-week trek through the mountains with a backpack full of cocaine. And that 3-week trek, along the way, there was other corpses with that same backpack.
Oh yeah.
Because they had succumbed to either exhaustion or the elements.
Mhm.
And then it really changed my perspective on, immigration and why they would want to come to this country to live and try to find a better way. And what are your perspectives on that, if any?
Well, I think this is a huge conversation right now. And I think one that a lot of people are not aware of the infiltration of the cartels into this country
Exactly.
and the degree to which that has happened over the last 10 to 15 years. So that's one facet of it. And for the guys that I was in prison with, like they all wanted to come to Canada, and just have, like the jobs that nobody wants to do here. People would literally die to be able to have that opportunity to work for minimum wage and be squished in a house that has running water and a roof over their head and be able to put some food on the table. So
It's so true. And yeah, and some of those individuals that I had met in the past, that was exactly that, like at least 15 years ago, and they were coming over, then illegally.
mhm,
But one thing they always said is that they actually disrespected Canadians. Sorry. They just had a dim view on Canadians' disrespect for our own country. They said we were spoiled, we took everything for granted, and you've just said it, like the poverty and the living conditions. It's like human suffering for us.
mhm. Yeah, and it's an interesting thing as well, because again, people here are acting from their level of consciousness and their lived experience. And, so in the same way, we kind of project an image on, people that are immigrating or people that are working for a cartel. They're also projecting all of their unconscious shadows and beliefs on us, so it's kind of this back and forth projection game where really at the end of the day we just need to see each other as humans, and we're living our experience, and just accepting other people for who they are. And at the end of the day, it just comes back to love, and in survival mode, that's difficult to access, and so it causes us to make decisions to do things that hurt other people. And and there's lots of people living here that make those same decisions,
It's
and
very true.
probably lots of people listening that can relate to that.
Yes. Well, and an aspect of that is that we dehumanize people.
Totally.
Depersonalize, we dehumanize. Like whenever I have a client that is, known drug dealer, I've done this myself. I've sold drugs, and I always ask, like, why are we killing our own kind? Why are we killing humanity? Just because we don't know that person directly, we're causing harm to them. And why is it in our psyche that we want to do this? That
Hmm.
projected shadow.
Well, and to me, it's all a game of consciousness, because, as I've been saying, we can only choose and live from our level of consciousness. And so, to me, the only hope really for humanity is to raise our level of consciousness. And so that's why I've dedicated my life to this work, is because I see it as really the only thing that's going to solve these issues that we're having in the world, and are becoming more and more apparent, as things start to crack and crumble.
Yes, absolutely. And I can actually hardly wait to dive into that part of our conversation. However, I do want to ask one more thing about the incarceration part, and that is, what about the authorities? What about the guards? How did they treat you, and how did they treat other inmates?
Um, I think maybe just to speak as a whole, they treated us. Some were okay. Most treated us poorly. And so I can think back to a couple that were felt like pretty good people, but that was, maybe the five, or the 3 or 4%. And most of them are more on the projection of anger and taking out their own frustrations on the prisoners. And, for me, I was an anomaly, right? I'm this gringo. And, when I got to the cell, guys were, they're looking out from the cell, and they're like, oh, there's that gringo that was on TV, like, and it's, everybody kind of knows who you are, but nobody can really figure out, like, how did this guy wind up here? And so there was a little bit of curiosity around who I was and what I was doing. So oftentimes there would kind of be this kind of like honeymoon phase of they just wanted to figure out who I was. And then those unconscious kind of shadows would start to come out. And then it's like an opportunity to take out your frustrations on a white person. So yeah, so
Yeah. And then, so with the gringo that was practicing his yoga and meditation, how was that received?
and with a great deal of curiosity, and curiosity kind of mixed with fear. It's kind of like, what is this guy doing in the corner? And why is he different? And can we try and break him?
Oh, interesting. So there was some bullying.
Oh God,
Oh,
it's nonstop, right? And so again, there's a curiosity, but you're within this hierarchy, of animal instinct, and so there's curiosity to a degree, but you can't be too curious, because if you show too much interest, then you're kind of taking yourself down the totem pole, so it's kind of like there is a deep interest, but they can only kind of show so much of that. And yet, there was a lot of conversations in there about consciousness, about what I was doing, about what, I refused to believe that I was going to spend 10 to 25 years there. And I refused to take the extradition back to Canada and get a criminal record here. I believed that I would get out without a criminal record, and that was going to happen a lot quicker than 10 to 25 years. And so there was a lot of interest around that, around, well, what is he doing? Because, it kind of looks like it's also working. Yeah, but multifaceted is maybe the answer to that question.
so what I'm hearing then is you were looking at doing 20 to 25 years in the Mexican prison or being extradited to Canada?
10 to 25 years was the sentence that I was facing for the trafficking charge. And I could have, through the consulate, been extradited back to Canada. And then as soon as I landed in Canada, I would have received a sentence for the crime that I was being charged with, which I was never charged for.
Okay. Yeah. So you got out a lot earlier than that 10 to 20 years then.
I did, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And on another interview with Lance, I do remember a piece in there that you manifested that. You just repeated that daily. It was like your affirmation.
Yeah, that was my mantra, was freedom. And basically from the time I woke up in the morning until the time I went to bed, whether I was doing yoga or whether I was eating or drinking water, it was just mantra of freedom, freedom, freedom.
Wow, incredible. And then so with the reintegration, like now you're released, you're going back into the world. That has a whole nother set of challenges.
Yeah.
Do you want to share with us the reintegration part?
Yeah, gosh, it was a wild journey, even getting back out of the immigration center. And I got flown back to Canada and basically escorted onto a plane in Mexico City by a federal agent. And then, whew, got on that plane, and basically when I walked in the door of the plane, I was free. And when I walked out of the plane into the Vancouver International Airport, that was the first time that I had been free for 2 years. And so that felt like a lot.
Overwhelming, I'm sure.
Yeah. And my mom had bought me a ticket on the PCL bus, which runs from the Vancouver International Airport to Victoria. And so you get on the bus at the airport and they drive you to the ferry and you get on the ferry. And so, oof. Yeah, so being on the ferry in between Vancouver and Victoria was the first time I'd been out in the open air for 2 years. And then I got off at the Empress Hotel in Victoria. And my lawyer that I had in Mexico, there's a long story that goes with, the journey of him getting me out, but he really moved heaven and earth to get me out in the end. It was like he dug in and committed and realized that actually I wasn't another mafia don that he was going to see in 2 more years, that I was somebody that wanted to get out and do something good with my life. And so when I left the immigration center in Tijuana, he gave me a $10 Canadian bill. And that was the money that I had. And my parents were happy on one level to see me, and also very guarded to bringing me back into their life or providing support. Or I'd burnt a lot of bridges along the way to Mexico, and that the incarceration in Mexico was definitely a last straw in many ways, and in other ways actually felt like what started that process of reparation. There was just kind of a recognition of maybe why I was there, and in a strange way that started to bring about the healing. So I get back to Victoria, and it's pretty much like, well, figure it out. And I started looking around. I'd worked in camps a lot growing up and working in forestry. And so I thought, well, I feel like I need a camp job right now. And so I started looking around for camp jobs up north. I had a friend in Fort St. John, and he offered to fly me up there if I could find a job. And so I started looking around at oil field jobs, and and the weird thing is I'd already been on this path of yoga and meditation and all this stuff for a long time. And so it was like a lot of jobs didn't really feel like they fit for me anymore. So I was trying to find something that felt aligned with where I was at. And I saw an ad for a medic, and I thought I could be a medic. And so I found a program to do my emergency medical responder certificate. And I had some money still in a bank account in Mexico, and I had my whole life that I'd left behind there. And so somehow I convinced my parents to lend me enough money to buy a plane ticket back to Mazatlan 2 weeks after I got out. And I went down there and I sold off my things. I got that money out of the account, which was enough money to pay for the training, and sorted out all my affairs down there, and went and spread my dog's ashes, and then came back to Canada. And 3 weeks after getting out of the Tijuana detention center, I was sitting in the Justice Institute of BC in a brand new set of clothes that my mom had bought me, and just sitting there, just trying to fit in with everybody else. And that felt overwhelming at a lot of times. And there's just nothing else to do but just keep moving forward and be with the big feels, and just know that it's going to get better.
Yeah, and I can't help but to observe that there's still a lot of big feels coming up around all of it.
It's been a big journey, and and there's so many facets that we get back here and we get busy living our lives, and busy trying to get our feet back on the ground, and there's only so much time and space to reflect on the journey that you've been on. And some of these pieces I haven't thought about for a very long time, and and they bring up a lot of emotion, and that's a beautiful thing. That's to be able to feel all that and to recognize, just this wild journey of life. And in the work that I've been doing lately, I've like I said, I've been really trying to refine the work that I do, into some really succinct, shareable steps, and one of them is be legendary. And for me, it's coming back to Revelstoke. It's a full circle, and it's given me some time to look back and reflect and think, wow, like this has been a legendary life. And to be able to reflect on that and reflect on the choices that I've made since, and to think back to how challenging that time was, all of it, the addiction, the incarceration, the getting out, the getting my feet back on the ground, and having made the choices that I did to make something meaningful with my life. It's really starting to land at this point, and it's like, wow, you've done a good job.
Yeah,
And
it's almost like we need those necessary experiences in order to get us to where we're at now. And Joe Dispenza says it beautifully. He's like, with those really super negative, intense situations, they have to be replaced with something greater than. And that's what I see you doing now.
yeah, well, as I said before, it's an incredible gift. And when people are in it, if there's people that are listening that are in it, you can't see it. And you can't imagine maybe that things can get just as bad as they feel right now. The opposite is available. And if it's been really, really, really bad, the worse it's been, the better it can get if we're open to it. But that's a journey in itself, is being able to accept that, being able to work through those layers of self-doubt and self-worth and the self-sabotage that we use to keep ourselves kind of mired in that darkness. It's like, there's this part of us that loves to play the poor me, like, my life is so hard, my upbringing was so hard, and it's like, well, good. like that will propel you and fuel you to become the person that you can be and to be able to soar to heights that some people could never imagine because of the depths of darkness.
Yes. And as you and I have discussed prior, a lot of my clients are in the depths of this darkness. A lot of them come from parents who are survivors of residential school. They've been institutionalized. There's like the childhood adversities. Some of it, the stories that I hear, I can't even wrap my head around it. And a lot of people have this bias, this stigma around mental health and addiction, where it's like, well, they have a choice. Like, that's not how that works. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's, to that point, I feel like we do have a choice. I feel like there is a part of us that knows that we have a choice, but we may be so fearful to make a different decision. And the fear stemming from how bad things have been, it's like, oh my God, I'm so scared that if I do this thing, it's going to be worse than the devil I know.
Good point.
And so we choose to do the same thing over and over again. And I recognize where you're coming from on this point, and that it can feel so incredibly difficult to even acknowledge that there is choice. And in the depths of addiction, there is an energy that takes over that can make that choice almost impossible. But there's always a light. There's always that spark of light. And it doesn't matter, in my opinion, who we are or what life we've lived. There's always the light to turn to.
Yes, I totally agree. I think that's why telling these stories are so important, because now you are the lighthouse in somebody else's life. They need to know that this is possible.
Absolutely. And that's why we do it, right? Is to become that light so others can see that that's possible. And, the more people that are doing that, the more it spreads. And, and just as darkness and fear is contagious, so is love and light and vitality and well-being. And, I think as we go through our own journey, it's so important to be able to perceive the world in a way in which we see that others have the opportunity to change their life. And one of my favorite teachers, he always says, the act of observation is creative. And for me, that's just such a profound quote and perspective to take in recognizing that the way that we see life is actually creating it. And so looking at people in poverty, looking at people, coming out of these incredibly horrific circumstances, we can place our own poor me on that. We can place our own victim on that and say, oh, those poor people, they're never going to be able to change. Or we can recognize that divinity in them. We can recognize that possibility that they have. And for me, I have a belief that that helps to unlock that potential for others and to be able to lift us all out of this, this nightmare that we've created.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, with your experience with incarceration and knowing, even in Canada with the incarceration, like we have this, what they call a catch and release program. violent offenders, sexual offenders. Like the sentences are not very stringent. They're getting out, in very little time. What is your perspective on reform? Like, do we need more punishment or do we need more healing? What could we change about our judicial system?
Hmm. I think we need a lot more healing.
I agree.
I think we need a lot more humanization and seeing that, I listened to an interesting clip from a podcast this past week, and it was a podcast kind of going over a clip from Jordan Peterson, and I can't remember who he was talking to, and he was talking about the 4 to 5% of people that are narcissistic, sadistic, psychological, or and what's the word I'm looking for? Psychopathic,
Psychopaths, yes.
and Machiavellian. He was calling it the dark tetrad, and that there is people that strongly carry those traits, and anybody that's listening to this that's been in prison will know that in prison there's more than 4 to 5%. And you know and even within that, i I still see the potential that for healing, and within everybody else that lands in those situations, there's a reason for it, and we need to understand the reason, why they've made the decisions they've made, and we need to find ways to educate, like the I've been using this tagline for many years: educate, inspire, and empower people to live to their true potential, and finding ways to be able to inspire people to make different decisions and to believe that there's a different life that's possible.
Exactly. Have you ever seen Fritzy Horstman that does Step Inside the Circle?
Yes, I
Yes.
don't know that name, but I know the activity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she went into a California maximum security prison, and there
Hmm.
was like 236 inmates all in a circle.
Yeah,
And it's all childhood adversities. And when you look at the clinically diagnosed psychopath or sociopath, is like, are these people born like this, or is it a lifetime of horrible, horrific childhood adversity that shapes them?
exactly.
And can this be undone? Yes, I do believe it can be undone.
Hmm. We have to believe
Yes.
it's all we've got. And it doesn't mean that it's all going to change in one generation, but we do what we can in our own lives. And to me, that's, I think when, again, it's, if people are coming out of a really challenging situation, if it's addiction or incarceration or whatever it might be, and you're coming back out into the world, you're going to be in survival mode more than likely. And so it can be really challenging to be able to see outside of the perspective of, I need to make as much money as I can make. I need to get as much as I can for myself, and kind of be locked in those egoic survival based desires. And again, to me, that's where it comes back around to education. That's a great part about the 12-step program is to be living your life for a greater purpose, recognizing that there's more to life than just my own needs. To be of service, I think, is such a huge piece to recognize. And yeah.
Yeah, one of the main things that I teach my clients right out of the gate is teaching them about the nervous system. A
Hmm.
lot of us have no education around the nervous system and how trauma shapes that nervous system. And even some cognitive, behavioral neuroscience, where it's the thoughts that create the feelings that now create the outward behavior. And once they get dialed into that, I see a lot of light bulbs going on, and then they go
Absolutely.
from there. And that's why I really want to bring someone such as yourself into the facility and teach them about breath work, because
Mhm.
that is a lot of regulating the nervous system so we can start, reprogramming those neural pathways.
Absolutely. It's it provides choice. When we understand what's happening in our body, why it's
Yes.
happening, then we have that wedge that we can drive in, and to recognize, okay, I'm living my life on autopilot. I'm not
Yes.
really making the decisions, and I have the capacity to do that. And it's also going to involve learning how to feel and learning to be with big emotions, learning to face fears. And for me, of course, the breath is everything. And it's the one tool that's with us throughout our entire life. And so for the duration of our life, it's always there as an anchor. And so breath work is, it's a modality, and there's different types of breathing that we can do that will create different types of experiences. And I think what people often overlook is that the breath is with us every single day, every single moment, and it provides us that anchor. And it allows us to drive that wedge in when we can come into presence and we can make different decisions. We can come out of those reactive, fear based patterns, trauma based patterns, and we can choose differently.
Yeah,
And
there's where that choice comes in now. You know?
yeah,
Yes, I love it. So, what I heard, Jeff, is that when you started to reintegrate into society, you decided to take a job in the oil field. But where was the catalyst, the pivotal moment where you started to get into the trajectory of the breath work and started to become the facilitator?
yeah. Well, when I got back, I got a job up in camp and worked back and forth out of there for a number of years, and was just really steeped in my own practice. And I wanted to teach, but I knew that teaching yoga classes at the local yoga studio wasn't going to get my feet back on the ground. And so I did what I needed to do in order to build that financial base. And eventually I became a paramedic and worked for the ambulance service, and was just working my butt off on the side doing construction, and just worked really, really hard, and eventually had my feet back on the ground and had enough money that I thought, okay, I I enjoy doing these things, and they're also not my passion, and they also don't feel like what I came here to do in this life. And so I was working as a paramedic on Galliano Island at that time, and it was springtime, and I had always had sinus issues, related to accidents and drug use, and so there's so much pollen on Galliano Island in the spring. And so I was just in agony, with sinus infections, and I was trying to get this figured out. And I've always just loved to investigate and learn, and I had seen this image of Wim Hof sitting, on an iceberg in the Arctic Ocean or something crazy like that. And I hated the cold. I just absolutely hated it. And so I'd seen those images kind of floating through social media and YouTube and stuff for years. And finally, one day I listened to a podcast with Tim Ferriss and Wim Hof. And I was in just such agony as like, okay, I'm going to try going in the ocean every day and doing this kind of breath work. And so I'd been practicing yoga for 10 years at that point and meditating. And I started going in the ocean and I started, doing that conscious connected type breath. And all of my allergies were gone and I felt 1,000 times better. And it really, working with the cold, one of the greatest gifts of that practice to me is to be able to learn to work with fear and big emotions because there's so much sensation. And so I started practicing that, and I'd kind of built up this foundation of financial resources, and it really allowed me to work through that fear of, okay, I'm going to leave this life that could be pretty comfortable if I stayed with it. And I'm going to follow my dreams of becoming a teacher and sharing more and, and sharing some of my story. And because I knew that, you can be a paramedic and that's an important job. And yet in many ways, it's almost like just like the Band-Aid solution. And so it, in terms of trauma and things like that, of course it's important, but it's a part of this bigger system that's not working. And I knew through my own experience of yoga and meditation and now the breath and cold, how much was possible with that. And I could just see breath work really emerging as a modality. And it had had such an impact in my life that I just wanted to learn as much as I could about the breath. And so I decided that I wanted to become a breathing expert. And so I just traveled and learned as much as I could and studied on my own. And I don't know if I would call myself an expert yet, but I've been on the journey for a long time. And it's the deeper I go, the more potential I recognize that there is within that connection to the breath. The breath is life. It's everything.
So, I mean, I would consider you an expert because I've definitely looked at your training and the people you've trained under, and you've definitely put a lot of work into this, and what's an expert? I think, 10,000 hours?
Yeah. Well, I think I got my 10,000 hours for sure.
Exactly. So do you certify other people? Like if I was to sign up with your facilitation, would I be certified under you?
Yeah, I've been running a certification program for the last 3 years, and it's called the lightFORCE. And so it's technically on the outside, it's a breathwork and cold exposure facilitator training. And yet anybody that comes out of that program will tell you that it's a lot more than that. And so it really morphed into a leadership training and really training people to be conscious, embodied leaders in the world. And I think more than breathwork facilitators and more than cold exposure facilitators, we need leaders in the world, whether that's leaders in their family, in their community, in their workplace, people that are really showing up and doing their own deep inner work and really being able to show up and just be different, hold space for other people in a different way, and, be that lighthouse that you were speaking to earlier. And so I've been doing that for 3 years, and I just finished a cohort in June and decided to take a year off this year. And now I'm turning that into a 3-year program. And that will involve some work with plant medicines as well, which have been also a huge part of my path. And really the biggest shortcoming that I've seen in that world is a lack of embodiment. And it's kind of, people get kind of off in 5D and ungrounded in this 3D world. And so really focusing on that foundation of breath and cold and being with discomfort and the deep personal work. And then in a very mindful way, considering bringing in some of these plants in a very mindful and methodical way. Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more because I've also had experience with the plant medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it was the plant medicine that put me on this path of what I'm doing now with the
Mm-hmm.
working with clients in the judicial system. And the message was to call on the brotherhood. That was my message. And this was like years ago now, and I'm still integrating that
Mm-hmm.
message. But I find in the plant medicine space, because it's getting so mainstream now, that a lot of people are just journeying.
Mm-hmm.
The psychonauts, I guess, is what they call them. And they're not, like you said, that embodiment piece.
Yeah. Well, I think we're always learning. And so we've been going through this process of learning what these molecules do and how to integrate them into our actual human experience. And and so there's a learning curve with that, and we make mistakes along the way, and we can learn from them. And I think, at this point, as you said, they're becoming so mainstream, so easy to access, so many people facilitating, that may be better off doing more of their own personal work, because that becomes a distraction from doing the deep inner work. And for people that are in the process, it also can so easily become a distraction from just being human, and just actually doing the day-to-day practice and the moment-to-moment work that we need to do in order to reach that next level. And so it just becomes a distraction that pulls people off the path. And there's also so much potential there. And so I think we're just kind of in this messy middle of trying to figure out how to integrate some of these technologies that have been utilized for thousands of years into a modern culture, which is very different than the traditional use. So there's going to be some bumps along the way, and I'm excited to offer something that I think is really, really unique in that space, in which the breath is the focus, embodiment is the focus, and we have an opportunity to use other catalysts in a really mindful way.
Yes, I absolutely love that. And I kind of want to be a part of that path as well. I need to deepen my study in breath work and meditation. But since I started studying more Jungian psychology and the collective unconscious,
Mm.
oh my God, it just, yeah. And another huge favorite of mine is Stanislav Grof.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been reading his work now for the last maybe 3 years or so. And I
Mm-hmm.
can't get enough. I mean,
Oh,
this
yeah.
makes sense to me. And then to further that, you and I had spoke about Watiko.
Mm-hmm.
And now, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, because now for the last 2 to 3 days, it's like I'm going to sleep with these, 2-hour podcasts where Paul Levy is talking about the Watiko. And yeah, I've got you to give credit to that.
Oh man, I'm excited for you,
Thank
because
you, because I'm loving this. And I also showed a couple of my clients Paul Levy and the books that he wrote,
mm-hmm.
and they are absolutely on board. So now I'm going to order some of his books to take into the facility with me. And these guys are
that
like previously high level gang members and stuff. And with these particular clients, what's getting through to them is more of the transpersonal psychology,
mm-hmm.
the existentialism, the why are we here? What is going on? So let's go down that one.
Well, these guys get it. You know, if there's one thing that, that I recognized from, from a lot of the people that I met through my incarcerations, in Mexico, all over the place, is that, the people that end up there are the ones, they're questioning the system. They're questioning the life that we're living. They're like, what the fuck? Like, something doesn't make sense here. And I'm going to do this because that system just doesn't make any sense to me. And so these people are often very intelligent and also get the component of darkness. They've seen it, they've lived it, they've been possessed by it, and so they can relate in a way that people on living, like regular people on the street, like you start talking about darkness and evil to them, and their eyes just kind of glaze over, they get uncomfortable and just want to get out of there. And, and there's this paradox of the recognition of that it's like when we focus on it, we create more of it, but to negate it and deny its existence also allows it to grow. And so it's this delicate balance that we need to hold. But people that have, that have been incarcerated, been in addiction, been through trauma, been through abuse, they get it. They're like, oh yeah, there's something else that takes, people over, has taken me over. And to be able to have that framework of understanding, for me, it's been an absolute game changer to be able to work with Paul. His books have absolutely changed my entire life, and the quantum revelation is another one that I feel like we're really at a point where that's becoming more and more palpable, is this recognition of the quantum nature of our reality, which is not some new age theory. It's something that's been proven in physics laboratories for over 100 years. And the only thing we're doing with it is making computers and smartphones, and missing the fact that, no, this is the fabric of our reality, is quantum and dreamlike in nature. So what are we dreaming? Or are we dreaming a nightmare by allowing Wetiko to influence our behaviors, our thoughts, our decisions? And to understand that absolutely changes everything. So I'm overjoyed to hear that, because I know these guys will get it and dig in, and it'll change their life, and they'll change the world.
Absolutely. I totally believe that. Yeah. So, I mean, just for our viewers, because I mean, I read what Wetiko actually is and but how would you define that? How would you personally define
Mhm.
what Wetiko is? And how did Paul Levy's teachings shape your understanding of it?
Well, Paul's work has created my entire foundation of the understanding. So everything that I share here is what I'm sharing from my understanding of Paul's work, and from being able to interact with him. And there's a thing with Wetiko that I want to share even before I go into it, that Paul calls premature comprehension disorder.
Oh, interesting.
And so prior to sharing what it is, it's very easy to say, oh yeah, I get that. And then to just be like, oh yeah, I got it. But once you start to get into Wetiko and you start to be able to recognize Wetiko, you'll start to see that is infinitely deep, that there is so much. And it just, as Paul would say, and I said to you, it's like a psychedelic that keeps coming on. It's like you just start to recognize Wetiko, which is a Native American concept of a cannibalistic spirit. And so it's this cannibalizing spirit that is rooted in the belief in separation. And so it operates through our mind, through our ego, because our ego is a part of our nervous system. I think that's always really important for people to understand that the ego is a part of this nervous system. It's a reflection of the brain. And so the ego believes that it's separate from the rest of the world. Quantum physics irrefutably shows us that we are not separate from life, that it's all one field of consciousness. And so Wetiko is rooted in this belief of separation. So it's me and others. And I need to get what I need and as much of it as I can in order to get better mates, get a better position in the social hierarchy, and that's going to make me feel better. And so that's that cannibalistic spirit. So that's why Paul chose that name for his work, Wetiko. But this concept is universal throughout all spiritual traditions. In Christianity, they would call it Satan. It's in Buddhism, Islam, it's in every spiritual tradition. And it's just got a different name. And it's this disease of not being able to see what's real. And so Paul calls it a psychospiritual disease. So it's a disease of the mind, but it's also a disease of the soul. And so it's operating on levels beyond the mind. And it really, the only way that it can operate is it utilizes our creative potential. And we can just think about it as a force in life. And if people don't like the words good and evil, I like to swap that for evolutionary and de-evolutionary. So there's forces that give life that are evolutionary and forces that dissolve life that are de-evolutionary. Wetiko is a de-evolutionary force. And so it's destroying life. And once you start to see it, you recognize that, it is a disease that has captured most people in this mistaken belief that I am my identity that I think I am, and that I am separate from the rest of life, and that I need to get as much as I can for myself and take care of myself, and that world out there is separate from me. And so really the cure or the antidote to Wetiko is to reclaim our own creative potential, to recognize that I am more than the identity that I thought I was, and to start to hold that paradox of the quantum, which is that I am having an individual experience and I am not separate from the rest of life. I'm a part of this infinite whole. And as a part of that infinite whole, I'm a fractal of that. So I am an aspect of the Creator. And I need to utilize my creative potential in benefit to the rest of life, in service to life, to create more life. And so that's the cure, is creativity, and to really own our own creative potential, to recognize that I'm not my identity, I'm not separate, that other people are really just acting out my own projections, my own unconscious, my own shadow, all of these pieces from Jung. Like, he brings so much of the Jungian work into his work and weaves it in such a beautiful way with these spiritual traditions, but highly encourage people to go down that rabbit hole. That's changed my life and changed the lives of, as soon as Paul's last book came out, I made it required reading and in my training course. And when people get it, it's a game changer.
Yeah. Yes, I can hardly wait to start reading his work as well. So what I'm hearing then is like Watiko kind of shows up in ways of like that insatiable greed,
Hmm.
that lust and the wanting to possess material assets,
Hmm.
and then and what we're, ideally what's happening is we're kind of destroying not only our planet but humankind when we do accumulate all of these worthless possessions. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and I don't feel it's like we are,
Yeah.
and I think it's really important also to recognize that Watiko is an evolutionary force. It comes in to push us to our next level of evolution. But we have to recognize it and see that we're being offered this opportunity. Quantum physics is kind of like the antidote. It's like, okay, like this is also coming in at the same time. And this is the cure, is to recognize that, okay, I'm a part of this whole thing. How can I be in service, not just to myself, but to the rest of life and all the people in my life, and reclaim that creative potential?
Yes, I love that. And I do bring that into my sessions quite often as well, is like the universal laws, which
Hmm.
is a lot of it is Hermeticism, the Hermetic
Hmm.
principles. And I always talk about the first universal laws like harmony, karma, and then wisdom, where we are the cause, which is we throw the rock in the pond. We are the cause, the effect is the splash, and it ripples out. And so does our disharmonious acts.
Hmm.
And I talk about that a lot in my sessions, even when it comes to, say, selling drugs, because I always get people who justify their actions. Well, like, it's my drugs are better and I'm not going to OD people and I'm not selling to the pregnant lady that's got children. And I'm like, yeah, but the ripple effect is eventually you're still part of that one quantum field.
Well, and that's the thing, is the mind will justify anything.
Yes.
And it's so tricky. And so to understand those tricks of the mind and to be able to identify them. And the thing about Watiko is, as soon as you see it, it's gone. It doesn't want to be seen. In
Interesting.
Islam, they call it the slinking prompter.
Oh,
And so it's like this thing that kind of slinks in, you know, prompts. It's like, do the drugs, sell the drugs, do the thing. And then, but if you can see it and recognize, no, I see what's going on here, then it's just poof, it slinks away. And so that's what we need to do, is to be able to see it. And as soon as we see it, it's gone.
so with that being said, what practices and tools do you help people recognize when they're under the influence of Watiko? And are you met with resistance? Because denial is huge.
Oh man, I've had some serious resistance about bringing those teachings in from different people, and predominantly people that are really stuck in a mentality of, oh, it's all good, it's all love, it's all light. And it's like, well, ultimately it is. And we're having a human experience. And in the human experience, there's the polarity of light and dark. And so for me, it all comes back to, to those same three things: taking radical ownership for our life, recognizing that everything that is in our life we have created, we have chosen, that what we're experiencing in our life is not happening to me. I am not a victim to life. This is happening for me to see aspects of myself that I can't see. It's showing me my own shadows. When we learn to embrace those, then those shadows dissolve, and then we continue to move on. And so it's utilizing those tools of self mastery, of recognizing, developing a relationship with the nervous system, developing a relationship with the breath, learning to hold our own emotions that we don't want to feel. The fears we don't want to feel, the self doubt, the self pity, the anger, being able to hold all of those, well, it all comes back to the breath and just being able to breathe through it. And then reclaiming that creative potential and creating an extraordinary, legendary life.
Yeah, and in my experiences with the plant medicine, I definitely got to see what was orchestrating all of my bad behaviors. And even the material gain too. Like with the, because I also worked in the oil field for about 15 years.
Yeah.
And it was just work, money, spend, work, money, spend. And I realized that probably Watiko was operating, even within that realm, because it's just like this greed and gaining assets. And what is it? None of it means anything in the end. We can't take right. So breath work. So what I'm hearing then is breath work actually helps disrupt these unconscious patterns.
Absolutely. Being able to be present. Watiko is all about identifying. It's getting lost in a mental construct. It's not actually really being present in the moment. So being in the here and now is the only place where we can be creative. It's not in the future. It's not in the past. It's right now. And so we need those tools to cultivate presence. And for me, whether it's breath work or meditation, and whatever form that takes, it all comes back to the breath.
Yes. Yes. I have had some very profound experiences with breath work as well. Oh, did we freeze? Oh,
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Yeah. And I mean, so you can actually have pretty much like a psychedelic experience through breath work.
Absolutely. It's a really great way for people to maintain a degree of control and autonomy within a really profound experience. And, as anybody listening that knows that once you take a psychedelic, it's there and you're along for the ride. And sometimes that can be a good thing because it may break through something that we're not willing to do on our own. And it can also be really fucking scary, and it can also really go sideways.
Yes.
And so for me, breath work, like, you can have incredibly profound experiences just with the breath by shifting the way that we breathe and coming into these different breathing patterns and held in a strong container. There's so much deep work and unwinding of trauma, and just what's happening in those states is that active default mode network part of the brain, that ruminating part of the brain, is going offline just like it does in psychedelics. The brain scans of people in breath work and people in psychedelics are virtually identical. And so we can create that state where we have the opportunity to gain some perspective on our life. And we can see our life in a different way that we don't see it in the day-to-day when we're in that kind of looping thought and ruminating thought. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, everything makes sense. Or, oh my gosh, I know exactly what I need to do next, and I'm just going to go do that thing. And it's a really beautiful modality because there are no substances involved, and it's all self-generated. So it's super powerful.
You said like the full autonomy, because once you take a plant medicine or a psychedelic, like, you're in for the ride. So with the breath work, you have the autonomy. However, there is still some very profound experiences, and that can go sideways. So let's kind of talk about the importance of the expert. But like being in the container with somebody that actually is qualified to hold that space. Because now that everything is so mainstream, what I'm hearing is like, oh, I went to Peru for 8 weeks and I'm a shaman. That might not necessarily be true.
Yeah, probably not. Well, and
likely not. Yeah.
I think, I think both with breath and plant medicine, all of these big healing modalities, it's easy to get people high with psychedelics or with breath work. And people can have, a big experience, but can you land somebody after or hold space and ground somebody during those big experiences? And to me, that capacity is only built on our own capacity to hold ourselves. And that comes through a long process of deep inner work and meeting these different layers and different facets of ourself and meeting these big emotions that have been repressed so that we can be in that grounded, centered space when people are really unlocking some big, old, deep, dark shit.
Yes. Some very deep, dark shit, like even intergenerational trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's just, I've been in some containers where it felt like to me things were going sideways. But however, the people that were there facilitating held the most safe, most sacred container, and even the guardians were well
Mm-hmm.
trained to be able to sit with people.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's
it's
so
super
important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you believe that humanity is slowly starting to wake up?
Oh, I fully believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I feel
absolutely.
it.
It's, I'm guessing you've been on this path for a while, and I recognize 20, 30 years ago when I was starting my own path of awakening and explorations of consciousness, that was a pretty lonely path.
Wasn't it
And
though? Yes.
and I have conversations with people on the street all the time that blow my mind, in terms of people's receptivity and openness to embracing new concepts. And and it's just recognizing this paradox that in order for things to get better, things may look worse for a time, and that there's structures and different things in play that need to unwind, and that may look like a lot of destruction and a lot of things going wrong. And again, it brings me back to that Paul Levy quote around the act of observation is creative. And so if we're looking at the world and seeing, no, this is the rising of consciousness, then that's what it is. And if we're looking at the world and saying, oh my God, the world is going to shit and we're all doomed, then we are. And that's the power of quantum physics, is that
So true.
we get to see this for what it is. And from my perspective, it's all God. And so it's that consciousness is rising, and it's going to take forms that I can't understand with my little egoic mind. So I'm just going to just come back to what is true and what I know. And so I, without a doubt, believe that consciousness is rising and that we're going through what is the greatest transformation in human history. And
Agreed.
I'm
Yeah.
excited to be a part of it. I'm
Yes, me
honored.
too. Yes, and I'm honored too. I feel very privileged to be living in this timeline right now. Like, what an awakening. Like
Oof.
the ancient technologies are coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And like just like you said, I'm having more and more conversations with people that are open to hearing these types of conversations. And one thing I have to say too is the social media platform. A lot of people ask me, where do you meet these people? And I'm like, social media. Like half of us have never even met physically, but we're building this huge community of
Mm-hmm.
like-minded individuals that are on this path to raise consciousness. So here we are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you to Instagram. Right? We
Yeah.
wouldn't be here today.
Yeah, for sure. And So how are we doing for time? We're at an hour 40, but before I let you go, I definitely want to hear about some of your services. Like, do you want to share with the viewers like how to find you, how
Yeah,
to connect with you, how to get into some of your retreats? Because I see you were just in Kelowna.
I was, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've been traveling nonstop for pretty much the last 6 years before getting back to Revelstoke, and now I'm landing here and have, yeah, a big beautiful project unfolding here on the land. And I'm also doing some traveling over the summer, doing a couple of festivals, one next weekend just outside Sicamous, and another one near Headley at the end of August. And I've got a lot of great online offerings and redoing some courses that are coming up this fall. Will be the first re-release. But for the time being, for people to get started, I've got a great free offering on my website, which is called Reclaim Your Freedom. And so that's just a quick 20-minute workshop, powerful practice to give people what I consider to be the most important tool to really be able to start to unwind all these old patterns and find that presence and be able to choose differently in our lives. So I highly encourage people to go to the website, breathARMY.com. Find me on Instagram, breathARMY, breathARMY everywhere.
Yeah. And I'll put those links in the descriptions too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there any closing thoughts? Any last things?
Well, I think for anybody out there who might be struggling, keep going. Just, know that it can get better and know that the suffering is a choice. Pain is a part of life. We can choose how to navigate through that. Things can always get better, and on the other side of challenge is more magnificent than we could ever imagine. And I feel like I'm only speaking to that from my own lived experience. And so just encourage people wherever they're at, even if life's going really good, keep going. It only gets better.
So true. And this message is definitely going to reach the facility where I work. So
Amazing.
I'm going to put the intention, that it actually lands with some of these guys. Actually, I know it will.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for getting it out there.
Yeah. And such an honor to sit in your space today, Jeff. I'm really, really grateful for this conversation. Thank you.
Likewise, Ron. Yeah. And thanks to everybody listening.